What did you think about what he said?
He's very good at staying on message. Fred and I discussed this in the makeup room, how good he is. You asked him about buybacks, et cetera. He pivoted right back to President Trump's record on jobs, et cetera. Immediately on China, remember, this is the definitive hawk on China. He gave the speech at the Hudson Institute that we have all said was the declaration of a new Cold War. Yet he wasn't as hawkish here, which to me is a signal. The administration's working on a deal, wants a deal. He doesn't want to derail that. He doesn't want to get off message. That's a signal to the market that full speed ahead, they're trying at least.
That is a hugely important signal, and I hadn't realized that or thought about it until I read your notes on this. Fred, what do you think about that? Just the idea that we are in the midst of maybe coming up with something on a trade deal. The signals have all been positive.
So first of all, congrats to Joe. This is a good interview, and what Michelle said is absolutely true. This is an office in the White House that works. He's loyal to his staff is loyal to him. He stays on message. So I thought the message on the Fed was an interesting one because he was quoting the president. He was a little cool on Kane, but he didn't say where he was essentially on the Fed. And you know, the Fed has to be independent for the dollar to play the role it needs to play in the world. If people don't believe in our institutions, we start losing the dollar as a reserve currency, which keeps our inflation low, which stops capital flight. So he's being careful there. I thought that was interesting. I thought on China he was interesting, but there's a difference in the administration between people, say Donald Trump, who wants a deal and really cares about the number of jobs and the number of dollars that come in, and people like Pence and others who want China to structurally change. They want China.
But him not being pushing his point more, showing that President Trump is going to be deciding this, and he is going to be standing back and following what President Trump says on this.
Yeah, he's following his notes, but you had some interesting movement with the Chinese and the EU this week in Brussels, which shows that the Chinese are starting to see that they have to move a little bit, or they're not going to be able to play the role they want to play in the global economy. So you're right. He was careful. He didn't go after the Chinese in as tough a way as he's done in the past. But to me, this is the biggest geopolitical, geoeconomic change of our lifetimes, which is the rise of China, and how the U.S. manages this relationship beyond just dollars of sales and jobs in the United States is going to be crucial. And that's how we should measure the success of this in the end, is whether it has moved China and how it actually runs its system. And I think that's a real tall.
How do we measure that? I mean, how are you going to look back and say, we know these changes have made? I mean, when you're going against counterfactuals, it's hard to say, but you think there'll actually be measurable changes that we can say, we know this wouldn't have happened otherwise?
It's opening. First of all, you could have some deals between China and the U.S. that go against WTO rules. And then you could actually have some of the deals challenged. What you want instead is you want them to move in how they make their acquisitions. You want them to open up their cloud computing, for example,
right, and we have seen
to U.S. companies. And there's some talk about that happening. So even if you start moving it in the right direction, that you have a longer conversation and it's not just a transactional deal. And so I think we'll see the evidence of that. I think they'll give enough so it looks like they're moving, but they are feeling pretty confident about their system right now vis-a-vis ours.
I was going to just talk about the other thing that's very clear from the interview is the Democrats are going to run on identity politics. They're making that very, very clear. And so if they're going to do that, the administration's got a message. Look at the unemployment rate among African Americans. Look at the unemployment rate among Hispanics, and look at what's happening with wages. They're rising, right? So trying to drive a wedge into that messaging that's coming from the other side as they approach 2020.
You know,
by the way, I disagree. I mean, I think the identity, the identity piece of it, I think, is going to be a component of it. But I actually think they're going to run on the economy in a completely different way than you're reflecting, which is they're going to run on the issue
Republicans?
of it. No, the Democrats. She just said that they're going to run on identity politics. I would contend they're going to run on issues around inequality. They're going to run on the run up in the debt and deficit in this country and what that ultimately means.
How everything switched from the Obama years.
They're going to, but these are the issues.
Those will all be, but I
don't put that in the context of identity politics. I mean, you might put that in the context of identity politics.
But do you think identity politics will be part of their messaging? If you think the answer is no, I think you're crazy. It's absolutely, it's clear. It's every day it's there.
But you tell me what's going on with the way the president and the administration talk about immigration in this country and talk about all sorts of people in this country. And I think the other side would tell you that's identity politics in the extreme.
Of a different kind, yeah.
So the forgotten people are not forgotten anymore. That's a campaign quote. And it is true that wages are rising among workers. You have a tight labor market. You have low energy prices. You have low inflation. This is actually good for the Trump voters. So I think that will be where they go. The most important geopolitical question on this, aside from the China piece, which we've talked about, is Venezuela. I mean, this is the first battle of the new era of global competition. He didn't talk about China and Russia and Venezuela, but let's not forget a plane load, actually 2 plane loads of Russians came into Venezuela last couple of weeks. What was important is in his messaging is he was not making it America first or America alone. He was making it 54 countries, the OAS, the G7, sending a message to the UN.
And going to the UN. Michelle, what happens to that vote in the UN when he brings it there?
I don't think it's going to come to anything. They've already done this. Pompeo went in January and tried to get something done. And this is more about shining a light on what will inevitably be Chinese and Russian pushback to say to the world, look at what the Chinese and Russians are doing in Venezuela, both physically on the ground and also preventing change that would decrease the level of humanitarian crisis there, right? I mean, the possibility of getting change there is extremely difficult. They've got vetoes on the Security Council.
But make also no mistake, Vladimir Putin and the Russians are making this a test case for the Trump administration. The Trump administration has made this a red line. Maduro must go. Putin is saying, we're not going to have you throwing out leaders that are friendly to us, particularly autocrats, anywhere in the world, even in your own hemisphere. So this is a test that's really important for the Trump administration.
And there's divisions within the conservative community itself about what should happen there. Fred's right. They've gone. The OAS, the Organization of American States, is the lead organization on this. All these other countries are going along. The U.S. is not, in theory, in front here. But there's conservatives who say, look, the United States is going to get blamed or punished or whatever. They just own it. This is what we want. This is what we should do. Just be much more aggressive about the change we want rather than putting it behind the OAS, et cetera, because inevitably people are going to say, look, this was about the United States.
And we at the moment have friendly governments in Argentina, in Colombia, in Brazil, of all places, who are on our side on this one. But the longer this goes on, I would argue, the more this is in favor of Maduro, because the Chinese are coming in a subtle way, the Russians are backing him up, and so this could be Trump's Syria, where Obama says, you know, I have a red line on Assad, the Russians come into a weak country and they bolster it up. If that happens in our own hemisphere, that's very bad news.
That sounds awful, but you've also just said that the Russians are testing Trump on this, so he has to respond.
Well, but they're testing and they're betting that he doesn't have a strategy, and they're also betting that he won't take military action. And the strategy I think he has, which is toughening sanctions and cutting off money even more, in the hopes that the military will turn against him. So far, that hasn't worked. So far, the military has stayed true to Maduro, but that's going to be the real test, and the Cubans in the background.
There are a lot more sanctions that could be, there's a lot more that can be done before you have to get to military intervention.
And for your viewers, don't forget this may be the biggest oil reserves in the world. So for your viewers, this is not just any Latin American country.
How much more pain do you impose on the American? I mean, it's already a disaster. I'm not sure that another level of sanctions that hurts the upper echelon that have put their money overseas is necessarily.
All right, Michelle, Fred, thank you guys both for coming in.